All right, be honest. Are you guilty of hoarding data? I'm Mike Loder. The Tech Edge starts now. Let's find out more about what that means. Hello and welcome back to the Tech Edge, of course, presented by the team at AvePoint, where each episode we delve into the latest industry trends for business IT and their significance in today's landscape, which of course is ever changing. Today we unveil the solutions to data hoarding, the problem that is apparently costing businesses millions. Joining me now is AvePoint's Director of Information Management, Alyssa Blackburn. It's good to see you. Be honest, you data hoarding out there?
Okay, so
what does it mean, by the way?
Judge me if you will, but here is my one-woman crusade on data hoarding. Okay. When my children bring artwork home from school...
You're going to tell this story?
I am going to tell this story, yes. I take one look at it, I admire it, I tell them how brilliant they are, and then I put it straight in the bin. Some may call me a monster. Some may just call me Alyssa. It's
hey,
totally
if you've wandered around in my parents' attic area and there's photos and things I made when I was a kid, they ain't that great. But it sounds like governments are also dealing with a lot of this data hoarding. Absolutely. And it's slowing things down and costing a lot of money. Joining us today is Loryan Strant, Solution Specialist at Rapid Circle, here to help us understand a little bit more about what's going on. It's wonderful to see you. How can governments and businesses declutter that data?
Look, the reality is it's an investment in human time. While we can use AI and various tools to look at the age of files and look at the content, ultimately we actually have to sit down and actually spend the time and look through the content and say, is this something that needs to be kept or not? To your point earlier about, us hoarding things ourselves, how many photos did we used to take when we had, 24 and 36 rolls on the camera? You took one shot and that was all you had to go. Whereas now we'll take 7 of the same ones and we don't necessarily go back and clean out the 6 that aren't required. The same thing tends to happen with the files that we create. We create a file, we save it somewhere else, but we never go back and remove the original one. So it just accumulates and accumulates over time.
Absolutely. Loryan, can you share examples of companies or government organisations that have had to tackle this challenge and maybe how they did it?
Look, some of the best ones that I've seen were when organisations were actually moving to SharePoint from a file share. So instead of just doing a lift and shift and using tools, they actually sat down and went, let's go through all of our content first and see what should be moved versus what shouldn't be moved. And what they actually did, and I saw it in a few councils did it quite effectively, was they just did like a Friday afternoon, sat in the office, got some snacks, pizza, drinks, whatever, nice. And sat around and just worked through it like it was, boxes of files, worked through it and they went, everything that's left, that gets moved by the tool, but anything that we've moved outside of the folder, that can be deleted. That's the best thing, is really just sitting down and making it a team effort. That's what works the best.
I love that idea, and I love how you the idea of bringing people together, giving them something fun, and making it a business priority, and making everybody work together on it. I think that always leads to great outcomes, definitely.
Absolutely, but I'm curious, Loryan, what do you think are the main challenges for organisations trying to clean up their data? And I guess, how can they overcome these challenges? You did mention when you move one file, maybe something goes missing, etc. I've definitely come across it in the past. I've deleted something thinking it's not important, and of course another software tells me, where's that file?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge to understand what should be kept and what should be removed. Now, obviously, this is where you need to look through the file, and unfortunately, sometimes it's going to be a case of look through the entire contents of the file. It may be a 28-page document, but it might be a 28-page template that someone started filling out and never finished. So while it is 28 pages, it's actually only about a few paragraphs of useful content. So a lot of the times there are tools that we can use, and AvePoint has fantastic tools to help with this, to scan for files that have similar names as a starting point, and similar dates, and help identify those and then go, which one of these is the right one that needs to be kept. Beyond that, it really is a case of going through the content of the file, and a human actually reading it, because as I said, AI is going to help with some of these things, but it's not yet. It doesn't have the context, it doesn't have the history. So someone might need to read this and say, this file would have had to have been kept if we were doing this exercise 6 years ago, but actually because we're doing it now, it doesn't have to be kept anymore because it's beyond 7 years and we can actually remove it. So it really requires that context of current knowledge and former knowledge and history, not just the fact that the file exists and its age.
So Loryan,
it's all human.
when organisations are going through this, and again, when we're talking about just the huge volumes of data and information that they are hoarding, really, how do they decide what needs to be kept for legal reasons or business purposes, and what can they get rid of? Maybe not to the extreme of me binning my children's artwork, but how do they deal with this, and particularly on such a scale?
Well, this is where records management comes into it, and really understanding the law and how that applies to the organisation specifically. And it's one of the things that I see as probably the great divide between tech and the business, because we'll have the legislation that applies to the organisation, whether it's a Victorian regulation or a federal regulation or an ISO standard or something like that, versus the tech and what it's configured to do. And there's often a divide between that. Part of that challenge becomes that the tech says to the business, hey, we need to configure these things, and the business can't figure out exactly what needs to be applied to them. And that's where the first step needs to occur, is to understand what needs to be applied to the business, to understand what actually is a record that needs to be retained versus what's something that needs to be disposed of because it should have never been stored in the first place, versus something that we don't really care, we don't need to keep it. We probably should for backup purposes, but it's not necessarily a record that we need to keep. And that's one of the things that I see as the biggest challenge, because a lot of organizations will just have a carte blanche approach to saying anything in SharePoint is a record. Therefore must be kept for X years. But it may not necessarily be the case. And the problem is that if we have that carte blanche approach, then to the point of hoarding, when we've got things like retention policies applied, we then can't delete the content. So it then accumulates and accumulates and accumulates, and every version accumulates. And we can end up basically consuming all of our storage space, creating a huge amount of clutter, because we actually never did the groundwork to go, does this actually need to be kept?
So we're really talking, I think, about a risk and value approach. What's the risk to the organisation, but also what's the value that they're getting?
Because every time you're buying more storage, it's going to be cha-ching, cha-ching.
That's exactly right.
Now, we talked about AI. Sorry, do continue, Loryan.
I was going to say a really simple example of how this can be blown out of proportion is, and I saw with one client, they had a bunch of PowerPoint files that they'd received from a vendor that had a whole bunch of images and videos embedded in them. And what was happening was someone would take a copy of those, put them into another folder, open them up, and over the course of maybe 10 minutes, they would modify the title and the delivery date and who's delivering it. And it started off as a 250 megabyte file, but now because of autosave, it had 4 versions, and it was now 1 gigabyte file. And so what was a really small site was consuming terabytes of storage. So that's the thing, is a human needs to see that and actually address it.
And I think also for that point, Loryan, I think you're absolutely right, but also the very nature of the type of documents we create these days is changing. So our documents now, for the better, I need to say, but our documents now are filled with graphs and tables and pictures and
video,
absolutely. And so this is adding to that storage challenge, because what might have been a 50 meg file a few years ago can now easily be 50, or 50 kilobyte can now be 50 megs.
Absolutely, and it just continues to grow all the time.
I was just going to jump in and talk about AI briefly, because it's a topic that everyone's looking at and talking about. But how is AI actually helping organisations clean up their data? You did mention that people need to run their eyes over these things, but is AI actually helping as well?
I think what AI can do, and this is the challenge, is AI as a buzzword versus AI as reality. Because a lot of things that people are saying that is AI is really actually just calculations and measures. And it's not actually AI, looking at the context and the content and other signals to determine something. It's simply a case of this file is over this many months old and has been accessed by this many people in that period of time. Therefore, blah. That's not AI, but a lot of organizations classify that as AI because marketing and buzzwords. But what AI actually can help is by actually looking at, as I said, a number of signals, some of those basic ones, but also looking at the content inside of the file and analyzing it for value and saying, does this meet certain requirements that we might need to be, legislated about. So, for example, is this something that should be retained as a record? So I think what AI can probably help with is ultimately we, the humans, we're the ones liable. So we actually have to make the call as to whether this file should be retained or should be disposed of. But what AI can at least do is lighten the workload and provide us with a big list of content and why it should be retained or disposed of, that we can then review, and instead of actually having to go through every single one ourselves and make that analysis. So yeah, huge time saver. That would help a lot.
Yeah. And I think a lot of organisations, exactly as you've said, really confuse automation and AI. They're two completely different things. Automation is one thing, amazing, big fan. AI, very, very different kettle of fish. Loryan, I read a stat recently that came from Gartner that said 47% of users can't find or access the information that they need to be able to do their jobs, which is concerning. There's nearly half of our workers can't find the information they need to do their jobs. We know that tackling the data hoarding problem can help with this, including things like reducing cost savings, ensuring that we are maintaining the integrity of our information. Just tell us a little bit more, in your opinion, about why should we involve users in the process of cleaning up, listening to their feedback, making sure that we can improve their systems and give them the right access to the information that they need?
Well, I think the challenge that we have is that search will find a whole bunch of content based on certain words that we've typed in. And what we'll find is, that example I gave before where someone starts a document or creates a copy because they want to make their modifications to it. So they create like a underscore Loryan's version, Loryan draft 1. And then someone else does the same. But because that's not removed, when I come along and search in the future, I will find all of those. And then I have to then try to analyze, well, hang on, which one of these is the writer version? Because this one says draft, but is more recently modified. But this one was modified, longer, further back, but was modified by a person who's more relevant to the project. So this kind of, what we almost need is AI to kind of come along and sweep up after us and go, hey, Loryan, you started this file, you didn't really finish it. Do you still need it?
Loryan, very, very well said by you. It's all the time we've got for. I just wanted to get to the end of that answer there, but thank you so much for joining us on the program and helping us understand a little bit more about how we are hoarding too much data.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, that's the program for now. Hopefully you've learned something from our discussion today here on the Tech Edge. Alyssa, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, as always.
Look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Be well. Double check your data. Double check it.
You're watching Ticker. We'll have more in just a few minutes.